You are all familiar already with this pattern, which is known as Mother's symbol. You are probably familiar also with another design, double triangle, square and lotus in between. We don't have it here, which is Sri Aurobindo's symbol. You're familiar with this, which is called Sri Aurobindo's symbol. You get the hang of it. Everything is symbolic, and that means by manipulating the symbol, you can, and you are the greatest symbol. Now, when I look into myself, and remember those tendencies within me, something shrinking, something insufficiently developed, something exaggerated, something unbalanced in harmony with some other part of me, all of that could be represented symbolically and is represented in my room's arrangement, for example. But if I had to start working on myself, what would be the map by which I could assess what I need to develop, what I need to set right, what I need to grow? What is the map that would indicate the completeness of all of my capacity? Or what is that essential map by which everything else would be developed to full capacity? If you look internally, there are certain powers you have which are essential, which make for everything else. And if those you could map out, that would give you an indication. And now we come to the two symbols of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Both are such essential maps, but different aspects of reality. Sri Aurobindo's symbol is a map. The two triangles, there's one triangle pointing down, one triangle pointing up. The triangle pointing down is Sat Chit Ananda. It's the divine consciousness turning, pouring downward to manifest. The triangle pointing up is matter, life, mind. The three grades of consciousness which are struggling to rise, to get beyond their limitation and recover, realign with their divine origin. And this is the nature of the cosmos. The upper flowing to manifest into the lower which is awakening from the darkness, the self-loss, the forgetfulness, which we heard so beautifully from Vladimir. The lower struggling to recover its origin, its divinity and completeness and perfection. Where the two meet is the square. The square is the link point between the upper three and the lower three, what Sri Aurobindo calls the supra-mental consciousness. And it is that, when it is fully active, who bridges the highest and the lowest, makes possible the divine possibilities on earth. And therefore, within the square is, what do you see? Waters. In the Veda, the waters are symbols of the planes. 7 planes, the entire cosmos, divinized, manifested with divinity. And within that, the lotus representing the avatar. As a symbol, the flower is fascinating. Lotus emerges out of the mud, grows to bloom not only this beauty and perfume, but notice the lotus leaves, they are in the water, they're never wet. Are you familiar with that? Those of you who have not seen lotuses may not know this, but there's a special characteristic of the lotus leaves, they are never wet. And it's a symbol of the poise of detachment of our consciousness. Our soul lives in life, it is never sticky, never attached. It can flow through all experiences without getting stuck anywhere. That's how it should be. And so the lotus is, even the name in Sanskrit is Pankaja, that which is born out of the mud. Born in the mud or out of the mud, but not belonging to the mud. That's you. That's our souls as they emerge. And the lotus here represents the avatar, the perfect, divinized human being. The mother symbol, on the other hand, is very different. It's not got straight lines. It's not the structure. is the flowing energy that manifests in the cosmos, which builds the cosmos and builds everything in the cosmos. And the flowing energy, therefore, all circular, everything is flowing, and it originates from the center, which represents the divine Shakti, the divine mother, from whom everything moves and flows. And then the four petals immediately around it are the four powers of the divine mother as she manifests. We had some discussion around this in the last retreat. But the first aspect is the power of vast knowledge. All knowledge, embracing everything, aware of everything, containing everything. Nothing is left out. Everything is known perfectly, entirely, intimately, flawlessly. Now you'll see why this is the first. We'll see this shortly. The second is the aspect of power, energy, execution, breaking through barriers, overcoming resistances, which is the knowledge activated into movement, without which knowledge would be, impotent. But power, as it acts, must emerge from knowledge, otherwise it would be the bull in the china shop, destructive often, uncontrolled, unbalanced, erroneous even. So the power has to emerge from the knowledge, and that's why it's the second aspect. But the power as it flows has a huge complex work to do to execute. And so the third aspect is that of harmony, which puts all things in their right relation. If you did not put all your efforts in perfect alignment, in synchronicity, you would have disaster. Things would be unbalanced. Things just wouldn't work. And when everything is in perfect alignment, in synchronicity, it just happens effortlessly, flawlessly. You're familiar with the Japanese concept of just-in-time management. Everything is activated to be in perfect alignment with everything else. You do not need storage space. Everything comes at the right time, at the right place, and it's done. That's the nature of the harmony. Even if you need storage space, there's a perfect harmony of how much comes in, how much goes out, and everything is held in relation, right relation to each other. And then the fourth aspect is that which completes. What is all this working towards? To complete the form, to make the outcome, the result, perfectly, without distortion, without limitation, exactly as needed. I would say these four are extremely important in their sequence and in their role in everything in the universe. The whole universe flows and operates because of the working of these four. But we take an example of what it's like in our lives. Look at a company and how it works. Many of you are coming from that background, so it's an appropriate example. First, you have an idea, a concept, even an ideal. Often you articulate this in vision statement or mission statements. And if you don't have the reference of what it is you want to do, whatever you do will be pretty much meaningless. Your energies will be scattered. Every time that you're acting, you're working, and you have a conflict. Should we do this more? Should we do this less? Should we do this at all? You refer back to that, the knowledge. Is this aligning with our overall purpose, vision? If not, no. We modify, we moderate, modulate. In an action of a company, the top, the board, is the one which sets the overall vision, the scheme, what we want to do. And the second level is the executives. Their job is to take that vision and turn it into dynamic action, the energy power. The first level we call Maheshwari, the vast knowledge. Second level is the Mahakali, the dynamizing principle and power. Overcoming resistance and opposition, breaking through barriers where necessary. The third level is Mahalakshmi, and this is where represented in the company by the managers. They are the ones who are putting in alignment the different pieces to make possible, and going back to the executives. But they make possible, they organize, And then at the last stage, the Mahasaraswati aspect is represented by the person on the ground who finally assembles, puts together, executes, makes perfect. In the hotel business, it's the people that you're meeting on the ground. They are the ones who represent and actualize, make at a practical level what was your overall goal and purpose for creating this space. They're all in the right place at the right time, know exactly what to do and make everything perfect. And this last step of perfection in matter is extremely important. The nature of matter is it does not tolerate imperfection. At the level of thought, you can get away with something which is not perfectly articulated because not everyone sees the thought's completeness or perfection. At the level of emotion, similarly, you can express something and get away with something approximate. But the moment you materialize it, one flaw and it's visible objectively, and it bumps into something which needs this perfection and it fails. And so this fourth aspect is often the most demanding. In the project, you build a hotel, the first initial process goes quite fast. You have the conception, you make the drawings, the engineering calculations, then the assembly process takes place, which also goes somewhat fast. But the last step, the finishing, making perfect, that's the longest, the most demanding, the most challenging for everybody, isn't it? And it is so in everything. This is how the governments are structured. This is how the military is structured. This is how any work, any operation is structured. This is how the human being is designed, interestingly. The head, the knowledge is here. The strength is in the arms, shoulders, upper part of the chest. The harmonizing, organizing, digestion is in the abdomen. And then the feet represent the movement, the perfect steps. Not so obvious, but the fingers would be more obvious, fingers and feet. They are the points where you make the last point of contact for perfection. So, the first movement when the divine flows to manifest is this fourfold action. Each one of us is naturally aligned to one or more of these, effortlessly. That's how we are. Some of us are naturally thought people, knowledge people. Some of us are naturally leaders, action, adventurers. Some of us are naturally organizers, arrangers, harmonizers. People's person often. And the fourth is some of us naturally are craftsmen. We make perfect in what we do. Now remember, any project requires all four. And if some of us are naturally aligned and skilled in one of these four, then if we have to work as a team, we should make sure the team is complete, all four powers represented. If not, that's where your flaw will be in the project. When you have repeated patterns of error in a project, observe what's missing in this fourfold organization. Let's say you are your own project, you are a writer, okay? You have to do all four, including the last step of typing, which is the fourth, or writing by hand. You have all four. If something is not working out, observe where the gap is in the four levels of the consciousness. From a conception of a vision, I'm going to write the world's greatest novel, at least in intention. In my mind, I create the perfect scheme. My story is so fascinating. If people read it, they would all be amazed. But somehow when I start writing, it doesn't quite work out. People read my manuscript and say, boring. I'm saying, but it's actually very interesting, don't you get it? So between my conception and internal experience of the story to the actual writing, there's a gap. Where? So obviously from here to there are two layers in between, including the last layer. In the way I word it, I might get that quite right. But in the way I translate my concept into the energy aspect of it. In the way I organize the elements of my story to make it interesting. Those may be the gaps. Observe. And when all four elements are perfectly aligned, when all four aspects are perfectly aligned, the thing flows. it's done. An effective team will be one where all four are represented but integrated internally. Now, what is it that can integrate the four? Interesting question. One of them can dominate the other three. That's not integration. Often it happens in a company where one side dominates and it weakens. Over time, the thing fails. You need perfect integration with each side doing what it does perfectly in its own terms. What can unify all four? Remember the picture? Yes?
I think common vision.
Common vision. Come back to the center. It's the center from which all four emerged. When all four lean back on the center, that's your focal point around which all four can be harmonized. Because the way it works, all four are essential. You cannot say this is inferior. There's a sequence in the chain of action, but each is equally important. So you cannot say just because you are the footman at the last step that you are less important. You know, recently there were some explosions of the Tesla car. Elon Musk, eventually after the study, they discovered there was one person on the assembly line who was sabotaging. How important is that? You can't say you're a worker, so you're less important. They're the ones who are executing and making perfect, intentionally or by mistake. They can mess it up. So all four being equally important, the one thing which can hold is the one which expresses all four. So you go back to the core, and I'm going to use a word here, the soul of the project, the soul of the team. As you articulated it, the idea which brought us together, not just the idea of the project, the idea which brought us together, which then we formed as the idea of the project, the original vision. And that's the point around which everything has to coalesce and organize. Now these four powers, as they move into action, they have specific qualities in the execution which are needed to make that action effective and complete. And those become now the 12 petals around the four. So the vocabulary that Sri Aurobindo and the mother used to describe this is interesting. So I go back to reading when the precision of the word is important. The way the mother describes, the central circle represents the Supreme Mother, the Mahashakti. The four central petals are the four aspects of the mother, and the 12 petals, her 12 attributes. In another explanation, she says, the 12 petals represent the 12 powers of the mother manifested for her work. Now, this is the critical element required for the manifestation to be effective. And I read from another letter of Sri Aurobindo. This again goes quite deep, but we'll just look at the overall idea. He writes, essentially, the 12 powers are the vibrations that are necessary for the complete manifestation. You can have a manifestation, but it may not be complete, it may not be perfect. The 12 powers are the vibrations that are necessary. The 4 powers are active, but the vibrations necessary, and we'll elaborate on this shortly. And then he says something quite interesting. These are the 12 seen from the beginning above the mother's head. Thus, there are really 12 rays of the sun, not 7, 12 planets, etc. This takes us into, the symbolism and the occult side of the knowledge. And for now, suffice it to say that unless the 12 are there, you do not have the perfect and the complete manifestation. Now, what are these 12? And you see here, they're described as attributes, powers, or the names in sequence that the mother gives are sincerity, humility, gratitude, perseverance. The first 4 set, which we will be elaborating upon this afternoon. These 4 are like a foundation. Without this base, you cannot do anything. And we'll see why. You might ask yourself, well, why do you need humility? Gratitude, what should you be grateful for? Why is it so important? And we'll see, we will explore that a little more. Perseverance, it's obvious. If you do not persevere, you'll never reach. But what is this sincerity thing? What does it mean to be sincere? Think about it. Can you define sincerity? You know, we sense, when we use the word, we sense, oh, that guy is not sincere. But what do you mean by it exactly? If you try to find the right words to explain, you're not quite sure. It's one of those very complex, essential ideas or experiences you don't have words to express. And you'll see how the mother explains it and how we can articulate and put into practice. So these are the first four, which are like a foundation. The second four are what make possible the execution. So, aspiration, receptivity, progress, courage. Again, some are quite obvious. Courage is obvious. Unless you have courage, well, you would not even be able to do something extraordinary. What is this aspiration thing? And why? What receptivity to what? We'll be elaborating upon that tomorrow. And the last four is how this manifesting movement relates to the whole world, to everything else around it. Because after all, anything you do as a project does not stand in isolation. It can only exist in relation to the rest of the universe. And if something is out of sync there, you are as if opposing the universe, or you're opposed by the universe. So what's the relationship of what you're doing with the universe that you have to set right? And these are the four powers: goodness, generosity, equanimity, peace. Again, some are obvious: generosity, goodness, oh yeah, that's what makes for goodwill. Equanimity, you can guess perhaps in the face of difficulties, but peace, what is that and why is it so essential? And like the four powers, which are each equally important, these 12 attributes or qualities are equally important. And as we will be exploring them, we will also be introspecting, and we will see where we lack and what is it we need to do for correcting it. And so it's going to be a introspective, exploratory journey over these 12 as we go along. The focus of this discussion was to become conscious of what is this idea of symbol, what the Mother's and Sri Aurobindo's symbol represent. And remember, the Mother's symbol is the whole manifesting Shakti. What we're doing in life is always manifesting. The Sri Aurobindo symbol showing you the creation in which you operate, but that by which you operate is this which is represented by Mother's symbol, the Shakti that actualizes. Each one of us in our life is expressing this Shakti. The symbol of the Mother is not only Mother's symbol, it is a symbol of everything that is divine trying to manifest in matter. You as a soul is the center, or the power of your soul is the center, represent or operating through its 12 powers, through its 4 powers, which form the imprint, or their lack or their imbalance or balance forms the imprint of your temperament. And then the 12 attributes through which you have an effective, complete manifestation. Now, to step back briefly on the 4, remember I said all of us are primarily aligned to one or more of these. Even if you have more than one of them is still the more dominant, and that makes for your temperament. I often would give an example of how you recognize this. Let's say we are all next to a swimming pool. None of us know how to swim, and somebody has jumped in and is drowning, shouts help. What's your first instinctive response? Without thinking, what would you do? Jump? Okay, then you are the Kshatriya type. adventurer type, the leadership type. You don't think, you just act. Good for you, but sometimes it gets you into trouble. Often you're in more trouble and you regret certain actions. I wish I had thought before acting. Okay? But there's the other type which says, let me see, what's the best action? I look around. Okay, there's a stick. There's a rope or something which can float, I can throw in to help. The thought action is first, and then action follows. The second type is the one who will say, well, he's in trouble, I jump, I don't care if I can swim or not, let's figure out later how to swim. It works sometimes, that's what makes for heroes, but you wouldn't be a hero if you had thought it out. You'd be a good strategist, but not a hero. The third type says, what's in it for me? Oh, well, okay, I'm putting it a bit negatively. There's a calculation. Hey, why don't you help him? Help, somebody, he needs help. There's a transactional thought in it. And if you think that it's not worth your risking it, then you would prefer to take a secondary role. If it's your best friend and there is a whole investment involved, then perhaps you would take a greater engagement with it. And the fourth type perhaps would, depending on the skill acquired, would be either helpless and wait for others to deal with, or apply that skill that he has or doesn't have. But you see, the first instinctive reaction is defining one of these four impulses within us. And some of us are more richly developed, meaning we have more than one facet developed. Some of us have more than one facet developed but not integrated. When I'm in my thought mode, I can give you a very clear strategy. When I'm in my impulse mode, I forget all logic. Sri Aurobindo makes this comment, this is 100 years ago, about a particular community or type in India. You see, India is very rich in human types. Literally all human types are represented in a very small space. We are the world represented in one big country. He speaks of the Bengali. He speaks of the heart being so developed, the mind being so developed, but not integrated. They're passionate, they're brilliant in thought, but the passion and the thought somehow, they struggle to synchronize. Now this is 100 years ago, it might have changed today, very likely has changed. But I take it as an example because Sri Aurobindo shows this as an example. And there are people in whom one or more are developed but not integrated. Now our goal to be effective instruments, to be effective in life, in manifestation, is to develop all four facets and integrate them. And if you're able to do that, when you're able to do that, that's really your journey of evolution. When you're able to do that, you are a complete vehicle for the divine manifestation. What comes from the divine inspiration working through your soul acts through these four facets of your personality and the 12 qualities for perfect action, complete action in everything you do. There are a few people like that. Very few in history. The greatest in history often have had 2 or 3 of these developed and integrated, which made them so extraordinarily great. They could conceive, they could execute, they were leaders, they were organizers, and they were perfect executioners in everything they did. There are a few like that. One such example which immediately comes to mind was Leonardo da Vinci. If you've seen that. The scope of his knowledge, the breadth and depth was spanning every field. From physics to optics to biology to sociology to military strategy to linguistics to art, mathematics and everything. He literally defined an age because of what he had just in the sweep of his knowledge. But he didn't just think it out and write books. He did things with that knowledge. As an artist, of course, you see that much more, but you do not see so much more of the machines that he built. And they all worked, almost. And then, you see the execution. in the way he wrote, in the way he drew. The art is perfectly down to the detail, and the content of his ability to manage people. It's almost like you see a smooth life, no problems. He's able to do whatever he wants to do, navigate through circumstances, get it done. And an extraordinary energy. It is said that he slept only 1 hour in the day. And that 1 hour was split over 4 pieces of 15 minutes each. That's not humanly possible. Obviously, the depth of the sleep he had was unusual. It was almost a spiritual trance. He was a mystic. And he could draw energy from within. And the enormous work that he did was the work that perhaps an entire civilization would have done, a single person doing. How do you explain that? Because the energy that poured through him was not just his human energy. It was that inspired divine energy pouring through, but a vehicle which was fully developed, able then to channel through that divine possibility. And as a reference, each one of us should be able to do that, or the extent to which we grow close to that possibility makes for our effectivity and worth in the world. Now, most of you are involved in projects of some kind or other. If you put this as the backdrop, use the work you do, the project you do as a reference for developing yourself and your innate potential in this way, by this reference, you can also grow in this direction. If you're working as a team, you work together as a team to fulfill these. Where I lack, someone else fits. Where they lack, someone else fits. And as a team, we grow to become the complete symbol. You see? And to the extent that you're able to manifest this symbol of the Mother, you become effective and complete. Individually and collectively. And then as a society. And then as a nation. And as a humanity. So the theme was titled Manifesting the Mother's Symbol, and now you can understand what that means much more deeply. That's what we're here to do. That's our work. You could play around with the form of the symbol, but the principle 1, 4, 12 would be irrespective. We are the symbol for the divine manifestation. We can dwell on this for a while. Hold an aspiration for what we must become and fulfill, what we hold as a potential within. For a few minutes of silence. We'll have time for questions in the afternoon session where we will take up the elaboration of the 12 powers. We can give form to our aspiration symbolically by chanting Om 3 times.